Dixit is one of the most influential economic theorists in the world. His work has spanned fields including microeconomic theory, game theory, international trade, industrial organization, growth and development theories, as well as public economics, political economy, and new institutional economics. I would say that it's almost impossible to graduate from an economics program without reading a couple of pieces by him. Today he's going to talk about alternative modes of governance and their relationship to economic performance. Professor Dixit, we are very pleased and honored by your coming here. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Professor Avinash Dixit.
So first of all, is the mic working okay? I think so, good. Thanks. So thank you very much, Aaron, for that very generous introduction, and thank you even more for inviting me. It's always a pleasure to be in Istanbul. This is my second time only. There's always something special about standing in Europe and looking at Asia or vice versa. The only thing you could have done better was to arrange for better weather, so the view from Europe to Asia and vice versa could be clearer, but other than that, it's been perfect. Thank you. I'm going to talk about governance institutions. Economic governance has become one of these buzzwords just in the last 30 years. I dug up citations of it on EconLit, and in the 1970s, I could find only 4 mentions. And already in these 8 years of the 21st century, they've grown to more than 15,000, and a huge number of pages on Google. The trouble with buzzwords is that everybody understands them a little differently, and so you see people using governance in lots and lots of different ways. I'm just going to give you my definition and leave it at that. So by economic governance, I'll mean the whole framework of legal and social institutions that underpin, that support economic activity and economic transactions. And these involve protection of property rights, enforcement of contracts, and a variety of kinds of collective action that are necessary for providing a lot of infrastructure for economic activity. Not just physical infrastructure, but organizational infrastructure as well. I don't think it needs saying anymore, but it would be useful fairly quickly to recap why these things are important. Security of property rights is important because otherwise people will not have incentives to save and create the kind of property that is going to increase productivity and going to increase economic output in the future. It's important for achieving efficient allocation of capital, of assets. So it may be that you've saved, but the best use of that capital, the most productive use might be made by somebody else. And unless your property was secure, if you're afraid that the person would simply steal your capital if you gave it to them to use, you would not do that. Most interestingly, security of property rights is also important for efficient use of labor. And this was a Princeton PhD thesis done a few years ago, came out in the QJE last year by Erica Field, who found that if your rights to land and property were secure, you did not have to waste your own labor guarding your property. You could go and work productively elsewhere and earn a higher wage. And in countries like Peru, where she studied, that turned out to be a very important effect. Enforcement of contracts. In contracts, there's always the possibility for the counterparty to cheat you, and this may exist on both sides. And if that's what you're afraid of, you will not enter into that kind of mutually beneficial contractual relationship in the first place. I'll say a lot more about contract enforcement later, so right now I'm just leaving it at that. And then there's a whole lot of kinds of collective action that's necessary for providing public goods and for managing all kinds of common resources. All of public good problems, as most of you know, present business dilemmas. There's the temptation to be a free rider on efforts applied for public benefit by others, and those kind of business dilemma problems must be resolved if the collective action is to be taken. This may be done via governments, and in fact, in a sense, governments in principle are formed precisely to solve collective action problems. And this is something that gets forgotten quite a lot of the time, and people say that governments are a problem. Yes, they can become a problem, but they're also in principle designed to solve other problems. Right now, people are beginning to realize that as a result of all the issues that are arising in financial markets, and that's a lesson well to remember. But also, there are non-governmental organizations, NGOs, a variety of communal organizations that also serve to take the kind of collective action that's necessary. And again, I'll speak a lot more about that. However, there are situations in which governments are a problem. They might exercise power in an arbitrary way to the detriment of citizens, and then it becomes important to find ways in which governments can be constrained. And that needs collective action on part of private individuals in the economy. So, very quick summary, that is, of the importance of governance. To proceed further, I'm going to need to make a couple of distinctions, and that's what I'll go on to. The first distinction is between economic governance and corporate governance. Corporate governance has also become a similar kind of buzzword. In corporate governance, what you need to do is to solve a variety of problems of agency that exist within a firm. So, incentives given to managers, or shareholders' control over managers, all those kind of things are issues of corporate governance. By economic governance, I'll largely mean governance of transactions between different firms rather than within one firm. But of course, those two are related because the boundary of a firm itself is something that in the economy needs to be determined. And the standard theory of this, which comes to us from Coase and Williamson, says that the boundary of a firm is governed by transaction costs, costs of using markets versus costs of using internal governance within a firm. Governance costs are themselves a kind of transaction cost. And so if economic governance across firms is of poor quality, then more activities will be carried out within a firm, and they'll be done by all kinds of internal transactions through implicit contracts and become a problem of corporate governance. A good example of this is family-owned conglomerates. There are a lot of those in India and also in Turkey. The Tata family, for example, in India owns textile mills, steel mills, all the way to high-tech consultancy. And you ask, what's the connection between these? What's the synergy between these different activities that they should all be carried out within one firm? And in Turkey as well, some of the major firms, including, I'm sure, the one for whom this university is named, are exactly those kind of family conglomerates undertaking a large number of activities within which there's very difficult to detect direct economic synergy. And if you think about it, what they are really are an internal capital market. If one of the parts of the firm has surplus profits, it can invest them in another part. Why not just invest them outside in the general economy? Because governance is not good enough. Those contracts may not be secure enough. Within the family firm, you have guarantee that you will get paid back, you will not get cheated. So you see the way in which defects of governance lead to large firms. However, they also compartmentalize capital markets. There may be a big profitable opportunity that the Tata family sees outside of the family, but can't invest in that because governance is not good enough unless they can actually arrange to buy that firm and bring it within, but that's also costly. And so capital markets will operate less efficiently if governance is not good and therefore firms are too large. That's one way in which improvements in governance can lead to better economic performance overall. The second distinction is between governance and the government. So if, for example, you look at the World Bank governance site, you'll see almost all of it has to do with governments and with corruption in particular. Don't get me wrong, governments are important, and especially important in the matters of protection of property rights. And corruption and other instances where governments fail are indeed important causes for poor economic performance, especially in less developed countries, in transition economies, you see this all the time. But non-governmental, non-state institutions of economic governance also exist. And they might exist in kind of areas where the government is currently not performing very well, or maybe not performing at all. Sometimes these private institutions have their own advantages. For example, industry-based systems of arbitration or dispute resolution have the advantage of expertise. Industry insiders know social customs, they know